The United States houses nearly a quarter of the world's prison population. Only 23% of released prisoners will stay out of prison, and there are currently 2.3 million Americans in prison. These statistics are startling and almost seem unlikely or true, but these statistics are all true. There are many Americans in prison today, and a vast majority will be released and arrested again. The prison system in the United States is outdated and inhumane, but there are efforts being made to change the way prison works in the United States. New federal bills and codes are being written to change how some prisons operate, but for right now it's not enough. More needs to be done to reform prison in the United States. Prison, jail, the clink, the joint, the big house. All these names mean something to people who have been on the inside. They have gone through the process of being arrested, being put on trial, and being convicted of a crime. Going to jail is never anyone's goal, but sometimes life happens. I interviewed former corrections officer Kevin Scogley to find out what his experiences were and what he thinks should be done inside prisons. Mr. Scogley oversaw the admission process in Ada County Jail in Boise, Idaho. I asked him what could be done inside the jail to make life better for the inmates. He began by saying, "I think people should have more freedoms in jail. There weren't many recreational activities inside, so the inmates would have to find something to do all day." Of course, Ada County Jail is a small regional prison, but prison is still prison. Inmates that have nothing to do all day will search for and create conflict. Lots of conflict can lead to less social time during the day. Remember when you were young and had nothing to do all day? You would find anything to do, even if it were illegal or frowned upon. As long as you were no longer bored, you didn't care. I believe the same situation happens while in prison. People will get bored and find something to do, even if it is good or bad. I also asked Mr. Scogley what he would give to the prisoners to make life in prison more like daily life in the outside world. I would let them have a phone, he said. Not a smartphone or anything, but just a phone where they could call or text relatives to keep in touch with them. This recommendation is another one that I would follow. Having a phone to call or text loved ones can greatly change someone's attitude, whether they are in prison or not. The U.S. government has also started to make changes inside prisons, but with more of a focus on correction officers. The Prison Reform and Redemption Act from 2017 outlines some changes that were to be made in all prisons. A few new prison ordinances are as follows. They will begin to incorporate de-escalation techniques into its training programs. This means that officers will be trained to use less force and more of their words while calming down and de-escalating conflict inside the prison. Another ordinance that was written is that prisons will establish programs on youth mentorship and service to abandoned, rescued, or vulnerable animals. These new programs can help inmates find a purpose in life. Maybe they find joy in helping and mentoring youth, or they find solace in helping rescued or neglected animals. Another important ordinance written was that prisons must designate a release preparation coordinator at each facility that houses prisoners. This takes me to my next topic of discussion, life after prison. The First Step Act of 2018 is the newest bill that has been introduced to help reform prisons. This bill is not exceedingly long or detailed, but includes an important paragraph about life after prison. This paragraph outlines the Residential Reentry Center expansion, which gives $244 million to the expansion of halfway houses. Halfway houses are houses that recently released inmates can stay in if they choose to. This part of the First Step Act will allow more beds to be provided to the halfway houses, allowing more people to stay in that specific house. Another thing that the First Step Act promises is that $37 million will go into medication-assisted treatment. This allows more treatment to be given to drug addicts or alcoholics who need it in prison. Here I have a graph that shows people with multiple arrests who have serious health issues. So here, 52% of people with substance abuse disorder have 2 or more arrests. Now that is a very large number and a startling statistic. Now if this treatment works the way it should, then inmates should be able to kick any drug or alcohol problems that they have had. Life after prison is difficult for many. That is why so many continue to live a life of crime. Many are unemployed and are in poverty. They believe that prison has to be better than living on the streets. And for some people it may be true, but it shouldn't be that way. Here we have another graph that shows the percent of unemployed people who have been arrested 2 or more times. So 15% of unemployed people have been arrested 2 or more times. 36% of people without a high school diploma have been arrested 2 or more times. And 49% of people below an annual income of $10,000 have been arrested 2 or more times. Life after prison should not be more difficult than being in prison. We need to provide more opportunities for released prisoners and others on parole. We need to lift restrictions on felons, as they can't vote and usually can't land a well-paid job. After getting out of prison, many will live their life on the streets and fall into the habits they had before going in, whether that be drugs and alcohol or low-level crime. I'm a strong believer in the saying, everyone deserves a second chance, because I think everyone does deserve a second chance. Things happen in life that you can't control, and you should be able to make up for those mistakes. It's hard to create big change in a country with 300 million people and a government that is thousands of miles away, but we have to try our best. Prison reform is a much-needed change in this country. The First Step Act and Prison Reform and Redemption Act are just the beginning. These documents are stepping stones on the way to complete reform in prisons. Around the world, prisons operate differently than in the U.S. There are some that are worse, such as Ecuador, Mexico, and Middle Eastern states, but there are also some prison systems that work much better than the one we have in the United States. A country that is top tier in the way they run prisons is Sweden. According to Mike.com, Sweden only has 4,500 prisoners currently, and the recidivism rate is about 40%, meaning less than half of people released from prison go back. The U.S. recidivism rate, for example, is around 75%. Cells in Swedish prisons have desks, TVs, lamps, closets, whiteboards, and other amenities, while the U.S. has the beds, sinks, and toilets, and not much else. The recreation around the prisons in Sweden are also much different. In some prisons, they have ping pong, pool, darts, art, gardens, and other fun things to do around the prison. In the U.S., they mostly have rudimentary gyms, libraries, and not much else. Having these privileges allow prisoners to not exactly enjoy their time in prison, but to have a less stressful and more constructive time in prison. The U.S. prison system, I believe, would bode well under these conditions. Another major part of the Sweden system, and something that the U.S. is trying to implement, is a contact officer. These officers' jobs are to monitor and help inmates make progress toward a return to the outside world. The U.S. is starting to do this, as it was stated in the Prison Reform and Redemption Act. Now, I'm not saying that the U.S. should try to change and adopt everything that is working in Swedish prisons, but I think we could use some of their ideas and begin to create some of our own that would work here in America. After everything is said and done with prison reform, how will we know it worked? Well, we should see rearrests go down. The inside of prisons will be updated and better kept than they are right now. Prisoners will have more to do on the inside and will have a better and more friendly community with the inmates and the correction officers. There will be more opportunity for people just getting out of prison. Halfway houses will have more opportunities for people fresh out of jail. There will be more jobs for felons, and felons will have the right to vote. The prison system in the United States is due for a change, so keep fighting, keep pushing, keep calling and writing your representatives. Every American citizen deserves to be treated like a human being, and everyone deserves a second chance.